Hello, everybody, and welcome to our second episode of Rewind. Those of you who are gracious enough to have listened to the first one.
Rewind.
Oh, sorry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Remind. Not to be confused with Rewind, but Remind. For those of you who were lovely enough to check us out on the first episode, you would have known a bit of an audio issue with my microphone. I do apologise. But as normal, Ash is looking and sounding amazing. Ash, wonderful to have you here. How are you?
Great to be with you today. I'm awesome, thank you. I'm always excited to chat to you and deep dive into some curly topics. How are you doing?
Very, very well. So today you wanted to put out about who am I? Who are you? Who am I? Who are we? All of those type of things. Fairly big topic. Pretty sure we're not going to cover over everything in this episode. But I think we'll just sort of touch on maybe what you think, what I think, some of the goods and the bads, and then we can have a little or a few little other items we can talk about in future episodes. So I want to hand it over to you, Dr. Ashley Morland. Who are you?
Yeah. I want to give a little bit of background as to how we ended up here in terms of this question. This was a journey that I went on myself in my own life in realizing one day that I'd had a bit of an identity crisis because I was really young when I married my first husband. We had grown up together. I'd known him since I was 4.
Wow.
And our first child was born one day shy of 9 months from the day we got married. So very quickly after we got married, I took his surname. And as a 22-year-old, I was pregnant. And it was a very, very much a wanted and loved baby. So the thing that came up for me was that I actually didn't know who I was anymore because I had found myself as his wife and this baby's mum. And then over a period of time, it wasn't as if one day I just woke up and went, I don't know who I am anymore. It was like this piece by piece by piece by piece by piece, subtle changes throughout, particularly that stage of my life when I entered motherhood and when I got married and I'd been living out of home, but I was entering my professional career. I was an academic at that time. I had completed my PhD. And this whole journey for me was about realizing one day, if I'm not mum, if I'm not wife, if I'm not teacher, if I'm not daughter or friend or whatever it is, underneath all that, I actually don't know who I am. That was massive.
That
And
sounds
then from a practitioner perspective, I see this time and time and time again with women, particularly women. Men, it can happen too, but women have such a different dynamic in terms of literally abandoning our own needs to have babies. What we can eat changes, what we can drink changes, the things, how we sleep changes, our whole body physically changes. And that can be really, it can really rock people. So that's how my sense of self really I became really disconnected from my sense of self. And I later went on to learn the interesting links in childhood trauma and all of those kinds of things. The reality is, I probably didn't ever have a strong sense of self from my adaptations from childhood. But my sense of self became really externalized and based on roles. So I would wear, as I said,
Mm,
the mum
yeah.
hat, the teacher hat, the wife hat. And what that manifested in eventually was ultimately a bit of a breakdown, because I felt like I couldn't do any of them well. I felt like I was a terrible mum, a terrible wife, a terrible teacher, a terrible everything, because I was dropping every ball. And when I really peeled that back, we're going to get to this shortly, but when I
Mm,
really peeled that back and went, well, I'm trying to be the best mum based upon all of my preconceived ideas of what the best mum should be. And should is a big indicator of expectation. I'm trying to be the best wife based on what I should be, how I should
mm,
be, what I should look like, what I should say, what I should cook, even how often we should have sex, things like that. Like,
mm.
it's just complete disowning of me. And throughout that journey, when you come
And
back to yourself, you start
yeah,
to reestablish that. So I'm interested in your journey, Dave, because you're obviously
mm,
not a mum or a wife. You haven't
no, no,
carried a baby before, but I know
no,
through
have
our
not.
conversations, can you relate to that?
Absolutely. But just before I do jump into mine, one thing I just wanted to ask you about all of that. With your experience, what was the catalyst for that sort of, and it's probably more coming down to, it was a feeling that something wasn't fulfilling. Is that what started to change and everything started to break down? You weren't getting satisfaction out of the roles. Is that fair enough? Would you sort of say that sort of started to bubble up, hence why you started to realize maybe I'm not all of this?
I don't know that that's the way I would describe it, but the only thing that I can really recollect was just getting to a point in my life where the only statement that comes to my mind is, I can't do this anymore. And it
Wow.
literally felt like
Mm,
quicksand. It literally felt like quicksand where the roles just kept adding up.
mm,
I just
mm,
had more and more and more and more and more roles, more expectations, more. And the more things that kept adding up, the more masks I had to wear, the more
yeah.
now I had to live up to, the less of me there was. And I feel like that was my spirit actually just saying, I can't do this anymore,
Mm,
because I wasn't actually expressing or experiencing life as me, as the me that was knitted together in my mother's womb for a big purpose in this world. I
mm.
was just ticking boxes and living out nouns.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's. I mean, the quicksand. I can feel that in that analogy. Now, for myself, you're right. I haven't been a mum. I haven't carried a child, given birth to a child, but I have two children. I am a father, and I've got to say, how did I sort of relate to myself? It's going to sound very similar to yourself. It was all about roles. It was all about things that I could intellectually understand and tangibly say to someone. If someone sort of said to me, "Well, who are you?" "Oh, well, my name's David." "Okay, that's my name. I'm a 43-year-old male." "Okay, that's my age. That's my physical appearance. I do this for a job." "Okay, so that's what you do." And then, I enjoy making people laugh. "Okay, there's personality traits. There's all these sort of things that I had to be able to tangibly know who I was. And at the core of all of that, it was my roles, because that's the most important function. I'm a
Mm.
dad. I'm a breadwinner. I do this, right?
All the nouns. We're coming back to nouns.
Exactly. And so when and I guess at that point, when you start to realize that these roles actually aren't fulfilling, these are roles. Roles aren't supposed to be the be all and end all around how would you describe yourself. Like, they are great things to have. They are, but they're a tool in a toolbox, and you'll probably hear me saying a lot of this in the future. But when you
Mm,
use it as a way of being, when you use it as an identity, which is what I was doing, it again, it was just for me. It felt like there's something missing, something major is
yeah.
missing, and so for
Wow.
me, it was like you don't get enough satisfaction out of your relationship. Well, I do, but I don't. But I couldn't say that because then, hang on, what does that mean? How do I unpack that? How does
Yeah.
this not end up being a fight? You don't get enough from your kids. Well, I love them and I'll do anything for them. But no, I'm not getting my full satisfaction out of that.
Yeah.
Okay, well, shit, how do you say that and unpack all of that? Because it's, you know, now I need these roles to complete me. I need these kids to complete me. I need this relationship to complete me because
Yeah.
they are me, because
Yeah.
I've made these roles me. And so there was something really missing.
Yes.
And so for me, this was that. The way it manifested for me was agitation. It was I'm not right. I'm like a caged lion. I don't know why, but I can't see the jail cell. It just and so being able to, I suppose, recognize that and having that sensation or that feeling of, I don't know what it is, but I don't feel like I'm living my full potential. That to me was a penny drop that, who am I?
I love that.
Because,
Something that came to my mind as you were just speaking then was somewhere along the line, we have mistaken the experiences of self for self itself.
or self identity, yeah.
Yeah, as the identity of self. And so the experiences that we have in our life, i.e., parenting and work and holidays or whatever it might
Absolutely.
be, all the different roles that we just spoke about, those roles give us experiences that our self gets to experience, but it's not who we are, it's not our identity. And I think
Correct.
that is so powerful. So you touched on a few things of, how we mistakenly identify ourselves as those descriptors, like our gender, our occupation, our marital status, our, if we have
Our
kids or not.
hobbies, yeah, exactly. Or
Yeah,
our
yeah.
personality, yeah.
And so that's one aspect of it. Are you willing to go deep here with me?
Yes.
Yes, I love it. So, another thing that I'm really interested in, because this is something that really brings in my expertise in trauma and especially our childhood experiences and intergenerational trauma and ancestral stuff, is how do we learn who we are? What we're good at, what we're not good at, what we like, how we think, how we relate with our sense of self and with the world around us. And so I invite you to go there with me
Sure.
to our childhood, because when I reflect on the sense of self, first of all, I might reflect on my parents' sense of self. And I would suggest that the nounified self was a really common phenomena in my parents' generation, and so likely yours as well. Is that true for
Absolutely.
you?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it would
So
have been
then,
their parents and their parents
yeah,
and their parents. Like
yeah,
this is just something that's been generational. So yeah, absolutely.
yeah, yes. And so from there, we are like absolute chain breakers, right? It's super exciting. This generation and those after us, and I'm really excited to be contributing to that through our shows and the content that we're putting out. But to really open up our minds and increase awareness of self from the perspective of the way we think and who we think we are, the way that we judge, the way that we perceive, the things that we think we are good at or we're not good at, or we do like or we don't like. Even, I'm an introvert. Are you really? Or is that an adaptation from a childhood where the full expression of yourself was not safe.
Well, you raise a very good point there, because society, you can only view yourself from within the prism that you've been taught. So, and that's been handed down, as you correctly said, from parents down. So if you were in a society which celebrated your ability to climb, then your identity would be based on how high you can climb.
Yes.
If you're in a society like that is very much now, it's about prove your worth. Because if you sort of come back, we're coming sort of, in my economic mind, we're coming out of, and we have since 2008, from a very capitalistic view of worth. Prove your worth. In the past, greed is good. All of these type of things. This is how you're supposed to prove yourself. So who am I? Well, I bring this to the table, and I've got that, and I do this, and I do that, and I feel that, and blah, 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 blah. It's almost impossible, and this is what I think that what you and I are so incredibly grateful for. We're living in an age where that needle's moving.
Yeah, I'm
So
here for it. I am hungry. I'm down for it.
Because you mentioned before judgment, right? If you were to say to someone who you truly felt you were, I challenge anyone to not feel, if I say that, well, like an idiot.
Yeah. Do you know,
A shame.
this is partly how this came up for me. I don't know how to go down this rabbit hole, but I'll start by saying I grew up Lutheran. I grew up
Yes. Okay.
Lutheran flavor of Christianity,
Okay. Yep.
extremely religious, very checkbox, very works based. You have to earn your seat in heaven kind of stuff. And
Okay.
if you sin or do bad or do wrong, you're going to hell and punishment and all this sort of stuff, right? And it was very much do this and you're good, don't do that and you're bad. And so there was a lot of identity tied up in that. When I was 12, I walked away from it completely. And that actually gave me a very biased judgment. Like if someone actually mentioned God or Jesus or the Bible or church or anything to do with that, I would have a visceral reaction to that because it actually felt like such a threat to my sense of self. And later, like probably in my late 20s, around about, I had a whole bunch of really hardcore spiritual experiences, which we'll probably go into at another time. But that all led me one night to, I was reading in the Bible the verse about love your neighbor as yourself. And it really challenged me for a number of reasons. But the reason that is relevant to this conversation is, what do I feel or think about people who love themselves? They're egotistic. They're full of themselves. They think they're better than everyone else. They're blah, 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 blah. And what that actually did is it uncovered this whole unconscious story that I had about people who loved themselves. And so how could I love myself if my self-preservation required me to be safe from those judgments of people who love themselves?
Wow.
Disregard the fact that that led me down the rabbit hole of which self?
Oh,
Who am I meant to love again? Because I don't know who I am.
wow. Because, yeah, I've been called selfish many times in my life. And look, there's definitely things that you can do which, I've always been a strong believer from a very young age. You can only fill from your own cup, right? If your cup's empty, you simply can't do anything for anybody else. So if I can't do it, I'll say no. And so, yes, a bit like you're only a good person if you always give.
Yeah.
Right? If you always turn the other cheek.
Yeah.
If, and it's quite funny when you sort of mentioned about the church. Like I went to church when I was a very young kid and didn't sort of get right into it. I feel myself as a spiritual man. But what I found was there's a big difference between rules and values.
Mm-hmm.
So when we have to sort of think of ourselves of who are we looking at ourselves through a value prism or through a rules prism?
Yeah.
And so again, when it's sort of like I think you mentioned about the Lutheran Church or your experience there, what you were made to feel was that you are only a good person so long as you've maybe followed these
These rules.
rules wrapped up in values or values wrapped up in rules or some sort of thing there. So again, you can only, there's no point sort of bringing a banana to a barbecue type thing,
Mm.
right? It's sort of, you want to be welcome at a barbecue, you got to bring meat, right? So if you can only look at yourself and if people only value you or you feel as though you can only be valued based on
These
that,
conditions.
correct.
Yeah, it's
I,
so powerful, isn't it? It's so powerful. And so, look, going on that journey, I relate to what you say. You said you consider yourself a spiritual man. I had zero interest in spirituality or anything until I literally, the catalyst for me was the very day I woke up and I declared, I can't do this anymore. My whole life changed because it was
wow.
almost like there was a surrender there. There was a surrender of me going, for all this time, I've tried to do it my way. And look at the mess I've made. Clearly, it's not working. My way is not the way. So, anyway, where I sit now is definitely, and again, coming back to this sense of self, I had this revelation one day, and maybe our listeners have heard a similar quote, and it's that we aren't humans having spiritual experiences, we are spirits having a human experience. And
Mm.
that's so profound to me because that's where the identity piece came together for me, where I only understood because I had grown up in the worldly constructs. And this is actually where re-mind comes from. The Romans 12:2 says, do not conform to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So the mind that had emerged through my early life experiences was one of conditions, one of nounified identity, one of worldly identity of what I couldn't do, what I couldn't
Mm.
be, what like the limitations and all of that stuff. But that was so intergenerational, like you pointed out. And what is so profound to me is that I get these like kind of messages or this inspired wisdom, let's say, that just drop on my spirit. And one day I heard, you are nobody. And I was like, my initial reaction to that is like ego spikes up and goes,
Huh?
yes, I am. I'm somebody. Who do you think you are saying I'm nobody? Like,
Mm.
don't you know I have a PhD? And so I nounified the thing, but I sat with it and I sat with it and I sat with it. And it was so profound because it was the truth. It was dropping in truth. You are no body. The true essence of who I am is not this body. It's not the person with the brown hair and the, I don't know, kind of dark skin and the freckles here. And this isn't who I am. This version of me in this bodysuit as Elijah and Elodie's mum, as Steve's wife, as Wayne and Jenny's daughter, that's not actually who I am. That's just the
Mm.
role that I'm playing in my life, in this life. The essence of who I truly am has no body. And that's how we
Mm.
have eternal life. We don't take our body with us when we die. So interesting. How does that land for
Mm.
you?
Absolutely. And so if we had to unpack that just a little bit more, it's like for me, it's when we looked at all of these things of who I am or who I perceive myself to show value within this society that only recognizes certain elements, right? which is changing, which I'm truly grateful to be part of all of that as well, is the fact that, okay, yes, I'm David, I'm a male, I'm a dad, I'm all of this, right? Where before, if I had to visualize it, they were all these badges I held on me that then made up the fabric of who I was.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, it wasn't working.
I got
At
this
some
image of paper mache. Like it's
beautiful,
all those things of just paper
right?
mache you into physical
And
form.
I've created this, right?
Yeah.
And then, but I'm not content. I'm anxious. I'm a cage lion. There's something missing. There's all of that. But you know, because again, I'm trying to conform to this visual or this prism in which society puts on us. The way I look at it now is I'm not my thoughts, right?
Oh, I'm
I am
having
not.
so much stuff right now, Dave. I'm literally seeing your spirit like trapped in a cage. The paper mache has created this
Yeah,
cage, but do you know the other thing that created is separation. The cage around you creates separation from yourself and
yeah.
everything else. So that sense, that unfulfillment and disconnection and all that, of course, because your bodysuit was the container you were stuck in.
And
It's
that's exactly right. And now I ask myself, what's the difference now? Well, the difference now is that that suit, that those badges, that role, and all of that, I stepped back from, and
yeah,
I'm now viewing that because those things are still relevant. I do still do those things. I can be identified that way. I'm very proud of all of those things that are being projected out of who I am,
can
but that they are
can I
not
question
me.
one thing?
Sure.
Could you be recognized as those things but not identified as?
Well, for me, it's sort of like if I had to describe to someone, and again, because I'll come back to that answer, because what I found is when I step back, if you were to sort of say to me, who am I? And I'll say, I am a being here on this planet wanting to serve others and to experience life. That's still, in my mind, not a full, complete answer, but that is okay. But what
Yeah.
I can say is I've stepped back. I can see all of that, right? So let's just say that's the avatar of what I represent as we go from this lineage of who are you? Well, I'm a war veteran, I'm a fireman, I'm a whatever. There has to be some form of how do we gel into this and how do we bring that forward?
Yeah.
Identify, recognition. For me, there's still things that I'm still working through, but what I can say, I'm no longer feeling like a cage lion. I'm no longer feeling like I'm out of
Yeah.
sync. I'm no
Yeah.
longer feeling there's something missing. I'm
Yeah.
feeling connected, but there's nothing I'm feeling connected to. I'm not connected to my job. I'm not
Yeah.
connected to all of
So,
these
so
things.
attached. This is one of the things that a rabbit hole I've been going down.
Attached,
You
yes,
can, you can
better
be
word. Yeah,
connected to all these things, but not attached to them. And
love
an
it.
attachment means that we can't surrender it. We have to hold on to it to control it. So I love that you're making this point, because if this is where identity crises happen, right? If we are too attached to our identity as a mum, let's say, and then all of a sudden our kids grow up, they leave home, they're doing their own thing, they're not dependent on us anymore. They have their entire own life. If we are attached to that version of ourselves and that identity and that role, we will not cope when it comes time for them to leave. If we have an attachment to our identity being tied to a relationship with a partner or anything, if that relationship ends, then we feel like we have ended. If that job or career ends, we feel like we have ended. And so the difference between attachment and connection is really important there. And I've been going down this rabbit hole quite a lot lately, because I think now with what you're describing, where you don't feel like you're that like stuck in a cage, you can feel connected to all the things that you're doing, but there is a safety in surrender there. And the safety in surrender shows and demonstrates a lived lack of attachment. And I think that's really, really healthy and so powerful and so profound.
You're spot on. Attachment is absolutely number one, because when I was before, I didn't feel connected to much, right? But I was trying to force things. Now that I have this sort of being able to step back, I'm so much more connected to my friends. I'm so much more connected
Mm,
and loving to my kids. There's just the fulfillment and the joy and the sense of being okay and calm and experiencing it has never been higher. So it's quite funny. You got to let go, i.e., surrender, to be able to welcome that all in. So yeah,
yeah.
you're spot on. You're spot on with that.
That's so powerful. Dave, I've loved having this conversation with you. I'm so excited to explore this topic in so much more detail. So, our next episode, we are going to deep dive more into what might be some hints where maybe we have disconnected from our sense of self, or what are some behaviors that we might observe in ourselves that might indicate a weak or poor sense of self. And then that allows us to do the flip side of, well, how might you be able to determine if we have a strong sense of self? Because I would argue, and actually, the Deloitte information online, they've shown this now, that across almost every single industry, that interpersonal and intrapersonal skills, as in all of the things that come from having a strong sense of self, is the biggest predictor of success, even professionally. And so for me personally, as a business owner and as a business leader, I would be even more inclined to be asking questions to identify whether or not my talent had how their sense of self was, and how connected they were to their sense of self and their own agency, because that to me would be a greater predictor of our professional relationship, productivity, culture, everything else that goes on to predict a high performing team than I'm really great at editing videos, or I'm really great at social media
Yeah.
management, or because those are just, you know what? Actually, it's not very, what's the word I'm looking for?
Well,
Uh,
it's a difference between having skills and talent. It's sort of like when you have these skills or talent, right? If you're really good at social media, it's because it's not because it's just about you understand the platforms. It's about how creative you are and getting your
yeah,
message across. There's a nuances below that, but the only way we can identify that kind of skill set is you got to say, well, I'm good at social media, or
yes,
I'm good at video
yes,
editing.
exactly.
It's
So,
so
so
what
what I
you
was getting at is that doesn't impress me. Telling me what you're good at doesn't impress me, but anyone can learn those skills. We've got YouTube,
yes.
we've got, like, now with Chat GPT, like anyone can be an insanely successful marketer, basically. But so the skills don't impress me, but you might.
So
And
let me maybe just clarify with an example, and it might say it perfectly, or I might be just trash at it.
mhm,
Instead of saying I'm really good on YouTube or I'm really good on social media, you'd be sort of saying I really want to show people stories. I really want to be able to be a storyteller and help other people be storytellers. Is that the
potentially,
kind of yeah?
Potentially, yes, but I would be more inclined to want to know more about their capacity to handle situations and their capacity to give and receive feedback, how they word things, because
Right. Yes.
all of those situations give me insight into their sense of self. Do you know what? If you're a single person dating, this information is relevant to you. If you are a parent raising children, this information is relevant to you, because you should want someone who has a very strong sense of self, because that means they will not be codependent upon you, that their happiness will not be intricately encoded into whether or not you are okay, that your children can grow up independent and capable and competent and emotionally available. If you are hiring and leading talent, if you're, leading a team of people, this information is relevant to you. There is not a single human being on the face of the earth who cannot benefit from, first of all, understanding their own connection to self. And second of all, being able to read other people's connection to their sense of self, because we are relational beings. Every single aspect of humanity is designed around how we relate with and to others. Our survival literally depends on it. So I'm really excited to go deep with this in our next episode.
Absolutely. No, I think we've covered off on a lot, but I think the overarching thing from sort of today's episode is that it's a journey. It's not going to be something that happens straight away. But if you're feeling the sense of you're sort of stuck, or you know there's something bigger, then there are steps that you can take. One of those is to try and see the badges and the labels, and I think you sort of said the nouns, and just sort of step back from it for a moment and try and view them as what they are, as in personality traits, physical traits, skills, talents, and all of that. But there's something a bit more. You might not know what that is, but that's okay. Because I think what we're going to be going through in the next episodes is looking at that frame, or those badges, or that paper mache that you talked about earlier on, that's filled with badges and then all of these symptoms of trauma responses and all of that, and stepping away from it and stepping back and observing it to then work through it, so we don't actually perceive ourselves through those traumas as much as we did before.
Yeah.
So
I just want to say one thing before we wrap it up, Dave.
Sure.
We're going to be hitting on some pretty deep, confronting topics as we discuss this. And if you're listening to this and something does stir in you, if you are triggered or activated in any way, you don't have to go through that alone. So if anything that we've said brings your awareness to something, reach out. Find us on social media at the Remind Institute. Reach out so that we can then give you some resources and support you to navigate whatever it is that's coming up for you. Because I remember this was an entire paradigm shift. It was like someone came and pulled the rug out from underneath me, and my entire life changed. I could not go on the same person because I wasn't. So if having these big revelations and realizations about who you are and who you're not, and the behaviors that you exhibit, particularly as we start journeying deeper into that stuff, it can bring up a lot of feels for people. So I just want to encourage you guys that we are there with you. We are speaking from our own experiences. We are on the journey with you for the ride. So please don't hesitate to reach out.
That was beautiful. And I would just quickly add to that while you might not be feeling too great at the moment, or you're just inquisitive, whatever it is, congratulations for being on the path anyway.
Yeah.
Because it's a path. You're not alone. And we're excited to share and to help wherever we can. If you're on YouTube, comment below. And as Ash said, reach out to us on the socials, which we'll have linked in the comments below, and in the podcast it'll be in the main descriptor as well. But Ash, it's been wonderful. Episode 2 of many to come, and we will catch you guys next episode.
See you guys.